Hey, welcome along to the final part of our Salty series. Before we get into that, let me just do a quick overview where we've been, what the key part of the series has been, and really want to start here that most of us don't want to be labelled salty. In fact, when we get labelled salty, we start to get angry, we start to get mad, because we all know someone that we've labelled salty because they're negative, because they're always down, because they're a real joy killer. You know the sort of person around them. And when we talk about being salty in our culture today, it's very negatively connotated. But this is what Jesus said. He said to us that you are the salt of the earth. But if that salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And so what Jesus has said, that you and I, we want to be salty. He says, don't listen to the definition that culture puts on salty about being someone who's down and out. No. You are called to be the salt of the earth. You're called to preserve the God things on this planet. You're called to enhance what's there, that we want to be salty. And as we've been going through this series, each week we've essentially looked at someone who had all the reason to be salty in the negative sense, yet we're very much salty in the positive sense, because it's very easy for us to find ourselves being salty, but it's so much better and empowering when we're actually salty in the positive sense. And so today, as we wrap up the series, it's titled Staying Salty. And we're going to look at Peter and John and the apostles right back in the early church. And what we're going to do is we're going to look through a whole lot of Acts, and then we're going to look at a little thing that Peter wrote. And so what I want to do today is we're going to cover a lot of ground really quickly so you can understand a little bit about Peter's journey. So I'm going to ask you to do me a big favor, listen and pay attention, because we're going to cover a lot really quickly. If you want to read this for yourself, if you go to Acts, read from about chapter 3 through to 5, even right through to chapter 8, if you want to see where the story continues to go. I'm just going to give us a really high-level overview, extract some of the key points, and then we're going to look at a few words Peter wrote and then identify some principles. But I'll tell you what, this is probably my favorite week of the series, and there is so much gold in it. So let's go, and I'll give you this quick highlight from Acts chapter 3. So if we start at Acts chapter 3, we see Peter and John, they heal a crippled beggar. This is awesome. This is so special, because really this man, he sits outside on the footpath asking for money because he's crippled. He can't walk. His legs don't work very well at all. And we see God perform a miraculous healing. I think that's exciting, that this man is able, and his feet and his ankles became strong. He got to his feet and began to walk. And we're told that he then starts singing and dancing and jumping because he's so excited. So this man's been healed. Everybody knew who this man was, because they'd see this man and be like, hang on, isn't that the guy that used to sit by the side of the road that couldn't walk? And now he's dancing. What's going on here? Something crazy's taking place. And so that caused a lot of people to look at Peter and John, who were then explaining, well, the reason he's healed is because of a man called Jesus. And let me tell you about Jesus. And so they told people about Jesus, and then the people came and they seized Peter and John and they put them in jail. Who seized Peter and John? It really was the Jewish, the elders, the Jewish police that took these guys away. And so what I want you to understand, this is so vital to know, is that when Christianity was getting off the ground, when this early church had formed and they were starting to share the message of Jesus, they were in a very difficult place, because they had the Jewish people around them that were trying to squash them and says, no, we don't want any hear about Jesus. He's not the Messiah. We're waiting for the Messiah. It's not Jesus. And so the Jewish people were doing everything they could to squash them. Then there was also the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire was trying to squash it too. The reason the Roman Empire wanted to squash Christianity is because it was a threat to the wider empire and the way that things worked. Within the empire, there was the Jewish people, and they had their way of doing things, and they had a special understanding with the wider empire that we've got some of our freedoms, we can do things our way, we'll make sure taxes get paid, we'll make sure things are done well. But the Jewish people didn't want there to be a whole lot of civil unrest, because if there's a lot of civil unrest, that would then get squashed. And so if we want to look at what's going on in the early church sort of with our modern day sort of language to it, you could say there was a grassroots movement trying to take place, and this grassroots movement was being squashed at both the local and the national level. And so Peter and John, because they're talking about Jesus, found themselves arrested and put in jail. They spent the night in prison, and the next day they had to appear before the Sanhedrin. And it says, so the next day the rulers, the elders, and the teachers of the law, they met in Jerusalem. They had Peter and they had John brought before them, and they began to question them. The Sanhedrin was made up of either 21 or 75 people, and so they'd question Peter and John about what they were doing. And then what happened was Peter and John got told off and sent away. Now the Sanhedrin, they wanted to do stronger punishment. They wanted to have a higher level of punishment for them, whether to beat them, keep them in prison, whatever. But because everyone had seen this crippled man had been healed, everyone was on their side, because they're like, look at what they've done. He's really helped this guy. He's done great work. They've really helped someone. So the peer pressure meant that the Sanhedrin couldn't go through and enforce all the punishment that they really wanted to. So they just said, hey, go and do not talk about Jesus anymore. Please keep your mouth shut. No more of the Jesus talk. Then they had further threats. If you continue to do this, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. So Peter and John, they left. And I love what happened next, is they went and they prayed with the other believers. So the other believers saw them, they got together and they prayed. Now, if I was in Peter and John's situation, the prayer that I probably would start to pray would go something like this: Heavenly Father, hey, thank you so much we didn't get hurt today. But man, can you please stop these guys from arresting us? We're trying to do good. We're trying to help people. We find ourselves being arrested. Can you please stop them from arresting us? But the prayer that the believers prayed was very, very different. See, look at what they prayed. It says that they raised their voices together in prayer in Acts 4, and says, now, Lord, this is just part of the prayer. Now, Lord, consider their threats and enable your servants to speak your word with great boldness. Stretch out your hand to heal and perform signs and wonders. They prayed for boldness. I find it so interesting that they didn't pray for the persecution to stop, but they prayed for boldness in the face of the persecution. This is so powerful, because you and I, we often pray for our circumstances to change, or for the things out there that we've got no control over to change. But what they're doing is they say, no, we're not going to pray. We can't control what happens out there. But man, we can control what we do and what we're responsible for. So God, we know that the persecution might not stop, and you've given people free will, so they're going to behave the way that they want to behave. But man, can you help us be bold in the face of it? Can you help us just keep going even when that persecution continues? What a powerful, powerful prayer. And what we'll see is this prayer gets answered so powerfully. We see what happens next is there's more healings. The apostles performed many signs and wonders. And then this next part I love. It's so cool. It says, all the believers used to meet together in Solomon's colonnade. So all the believers would come together. And this is the part that confused me. It says, no one else dared join them. And I'm going, hang on a minute. This doesn't sound like the church that I know. Because I've always understood the church to be a place that's got open door policy, that anyone can come in, that it's welcoming for any person, no matter their story, no matter where they are on their faith journey, that every person should be welcome, should be invited in and feel like they belong in the local church. And so when I read this, I'm like, hang on a minute. What's going on? Have I been wrong about my faith for all this time? Have I been wrong about the church? What's going on here? Because the way that it's written, it very much makes it sound like no one else and everyone else was excluded, and this was an exclusive club. But no, the church should never be an exclusive club. The church should be the most inclusive community that anyone could ever find. And so let's keep reading and see what it says next. It says, no one else dared join them, even though they were highly regarded by the people. So this group of Christians, the believers, they were doing so much good and they were treating people so well. They were highly regarded by the people. And it says, nevertheless, more and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. Hang on, this doesn't make sense. More and more people came along and were added to their number. So that means people did join them. But it says no one did join them. What's going on here? I did a little bit of research to figure this out. And this is what I discovered. That, hey, people were coming along, more people were coming, and it was very much an inclusive, not an exclusive community. When it talks about no one else did join them, it's talking more about the people that are coming in to arrest them, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the rulers of the law coming in to stop them. None of them did join them because they were so highly regarded by everyone else. They were too scared to get involved, and more people were coming to faith in Christ. Okay, so let's clean up. So there's more healings going on. And then what happens? Then they were arrested. The apostles were arrested and they were put in a public jail. So they've been told, they got arrested, Peter and John the first time, don't do this anymore. They keep doing it. Funny enough, they get arrested again. What happens after that? Next part is something that can be really, really hard to believe. We can look and go like, man, I don't know if I can engage with this because, man, this just seems so out there. It can't be true. And a lot of people think when it comes to Christianity, what we do as Christians is we check our brains out at the door as we walk into a church environment and we don't use our brains anymore. Can I tell you that couldn't be further from the truth? That Christianity is a very, very well explained faith. And so that this next part, you might think, man, that's a bit weird. I'll tell you why I believe this next part is true, even though I can't comprehend how it would happen. The reason I believe that it's true is because this book of Acts was written by a man called Luke, and Luke was a doctor. Luke also wrote the book of Luke, which is an account of Jesus' life, and then he wrote the book of Acts, which is sort of a continuation of the story from where he finishes in the book of Luke. And when Luke starts out his account of Luke, he actually says, to the dearest Theophilus, he's writing this for a person. He says, many have sought out to write an account about Jesus' life, but I wanted to go and do the research myself. And so after great research, this is what I've found. And then a passage that I often use at Christmas is found in Luke chapter 2, where he talks about the birth of Jesus. And when he's talking about the birth of Jesus, what Luke does is he actually describes the place where he is and the date that it happened. He talks about this happening at the time that a census was being taken. The reason Luke writes where he was and the date that it was happening is because he's saying to the audience that he's writing to, if you don't believe the words that I'm writing, here's the place, here's the time. You can go back and you can fact check me. You go back to that place, find some people, because they would have been there at that time, and they can tell you that this is true. Luke is a very, very well documented historian, so we can give a lot of weight to his words. So this is what Luke tells us happens next while the apostles are in prison. He says, but during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the doors of the jail and brought them out. And the angel then says, go, stand in front of the temple courts and tell all the people about this new life. So an angel breaks them out of prison. The angel's name, what is it? I don't know, but I would call him Angel Michael Schofield. Let's continue with this story and see where it goes from here. So they do just what the angel tells them, and they go back to teaching about Jesus. And what's recorded? At daybreak, they entered the temple courts and they continued to teach just as they had been told. And what happens next? Well, funny enough, they get arrested again. When you get arrested for doing something, you miraculously get out of prison and you go back to doing that same thing in the same place. The authorities probably know where you are, and what are they going to do? They arrest them again. It says here that at that the captain went with his officials and brought the apostles. And the apostles were brought in and made to appear before the Sanhedrin to be questioned by the high court. Now, I just want to pause here for a moment because this is fascinating. These guys get arrested, they get put in jail, and an angel comes and an angel rescues them and breaks them out of prison. Then the people come back and they re-arrest them and they go to take them away. I think if I was one of these guys, I I'm quite a smart aleck. I love stirring. I love just causing trouble. It's just fun. It's part of my nature. And so I imagine as Peter and John have been arrested and then they're taken away, I wonder if they'll be saying, hey guys, you arrested us. What are you going to do? You're going to put us in jail again? Because last time you put us in jail, do you know what happened? Do you remember the last time you put us in jail? Hey, an angel came and rescued us. So you can handcuff me and you can take me back to prison. I don't mind too much because do you know what? Just like last time, I'm sure an angel's going to come, an angel's going to rescue me, and I'll be stirring the pot going, hey, I think you're clever, I've got angels, we're sweet, I've got this under control. You can arrest me and you can take me back, and angel's going to come in and get me out. And this time though, rather than taking them and putting them in prison, the guards actually take them straight to the Sanhedrin. Let's have a little look here. When they are at the Sanhedrin, they call the apostles in, and they call the apostles in, they talk them off, they tell them off, and this time they have them flogged. Now let me explain to you what it means to be flogged. A flogging was something that oftentimes led to the person who was being flogged dying. It was a very, very brutal punishment. They'd have a big whip, very long. They'd even sometimes have little stones and pieces of glass embedded into these leather whips, and they would whip you on the back. And the first time they do it, it would draw blood, and skin would get ripped off your back. But they wouldn't do it once. They'd often do it 13, sometimes 39 times. And they'd whip you. And so the first time the skin comes off. Second time, a bit more skin comes off. By the time they've done this a few times, there's no longer skin there, but it's going straight into the flesh. It would be a very, very, very painful experience. And I imagine, again, I just thinking this through in my head. Last time an angel came and took these guys out of prison and release them. I'm wondering, they get in front of the Sanhedrin, and I wonder if they're going, okay, you tell us you're going to get flogged, and they're back at these people going, yeah, but that's all good, we've got an angel that's going to come and get us. You put us in prison, angel got us out. No, we're going to get flogged, that's all right, the angel's coming to get us. And I wonder even if as because what they tend to do is chain people up so they couldn't protect themselves, and then the flogging would all sort of occur on their back. And I wonder even if they were like chaining these guys up around a pole so they couldn't protect themselves. If they were sitting there going, okay, it's probably about time for our angel to turn up, come and undo the cart, like we don't want to get flogged. And then to actually receive that first whip, and then the next one, and then the third one, and then the fourth one. And I wonder if at this stage they'd start to ask, come on God, where are you God? You got us out of prison, but now you're letting us get flogged. What's going on here? And what I want you to understand here is so, so, so important. You see, these guys were getting flogged, and God was with them in the jail. God sent the angel to break them out of the jail. God was there. But when they were getting flogged, I want you to understand that God was there then too. God was with them as they were getting flogged. God was working in that moment. We must say, hang on a minute, well, God got them out of prison. Why didn't God prevent this from happening? I don't know why God didn't do it, but I want you to know that God was there when it happened. And some of you might be in a place in your life right now where God's done a miracle for you in the past, where maybe He came through in a powerful way and did something physical to help you and healed you. Maybe you were in a really dark place and God brought a right friend along and really helped you find healing relationally by bringing the right person into your life. Maybe you're in a place where you are struggling financially and God provided for you in a miraculous way to enable you to pay some of your bills. And then you found yourself back in another position and you're saying, okay, God, you provided for me financially last time. Can you do it this time? And He still hasn't done it in a similar way. And you're freaking out going, because now you've got the debt collectors really knocking on your door and putting the pressure on. Or maybe you're back in that darker place, and mentally, and you're just going, okay, last time God had got me out of it, and now He's not doing it. Or last time I was struggling with friendships and God put the right person in my life. Why is God not doing it again? And you're really starting to doubt, and you're really starting to get to a place with your faith. You're going, I don't really know what's going on. Can I tell you that in this situation, in this moment, God is just as present and is just as powerful and is just as loving and is just as with you as what He was in that moment when that miraculous thing happened. I want you to understand that, because you're in the same situation that these apostles found themselves in. And so here they are, they're getting flogged, they're getting beaten. And I wonder if this is, because what we've got to understand is that back in what we get told in Mark chapter 13, verse 9, Jesus is talking and He says this to his disciples. He says, you will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. So Jesus is telling the people around him, hey, after I die, you're going to be handed over. You're going to be flogged in the synagogues. And what we see taking place here in Acts is the outworking of that prophecy that Jesus told these people. And I wonder if they're reminded as well. This comes back into their mind as this is going on. I wonder if something there is taking place. And can I tell you this? Jesus also made a promise to you, and he made a promise to me of this. He says that in this world, you will have trouble. So you've got to understand it, and I need to understand that in this world in which we live, we are going to face trouble. As we go through this life, it's not going to be all candy floss and daisy chains and everything sort of perfect. No. In this world, Jesus promised, you and I, we're going to have trouble. But then Jesus said this. He says, but rest assured, because I have overcome the world. So just as Jesus made a promise to his disciples that you're going to be in trouble, you're going to get flogged, you're going to get severely physically beaten, and it's not going to be fun. He's saying to you and me that in this world we're going to have trouble, but it gives us that promise in that he has overcome the world. So let's continue. These guys get flogged and again ordered not to speak anymore about Jesus. And do you know what they do? They just keep going. That's why this message is called staying salty. These guys stay salty in the positive sense. They stay salty. The apostles left the Sanhedrin, and this part blows my mind, rejoicing. They have been beaten badly, yet they are rejoicing. Why are they rejoicing? Because they had been counted worthy of the suffering disgrace for the name. It says day after day in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming that Jesus is the Messiah. These guys stayed salty. And as we've gone through this series, one of the things that we've looked at every single week is that oftentimes the people that we want to be salty with in the negative sense are the very people we're called to be salty with in the positive sense. We looked at it each weekend, and we see it here again, that the people that the apostles could have been salty with, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the people that make up the Sanhedrin, that they are the ones that they are in fact salty with. One of the most incredible things that happens later on in the book of Acts is found in Acts 15. It says this, it says that some of the believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees. So that some of these people that were most likely there that day in the Sanhedrin, that at this stage they're advocating for the beating of these Christians, that some of these people later on became believers. That the way that Peter, the way that John, the way that these apostles acted in this space led to them asking questions about faith, and many of them coming to faith in Jesus. And I just wonder if it was the boldness of them in that place. If it was the way that they handled themselves when the pressure was put on them, that they still stood strong in their faith, that they were able to rejoice on the other side of it, that led to some of these Pharisees going, hang on a minute, there's something about these people. There's something different. How can they have hope in the midst of this? How can they find joy after taking a beating? How can they have a sense of purpose in the midst of all of this craziness where life should be so bad for them and we've seen it break every other person? How do these people still have that hope, that joy, that purpose, still express that same love and compassion and mercy? It's because they know that Jesus truly is the Messiah. And man, we've got to look into this for ourselves because there's something powerful about it. And what this leads us to, I think, is something so special. See, just as we've said, that often it's the people that can make us salty are the ones that we're called to go and be salty to. Can I help you see? I want to tell you that sometimes it's the situations, it's the circumstances that should make us salty, that actually make us salty. When we're in those situations and circumstances where it feels like everyone's against us, where it feels like life sucks, where it feels like no one cares, where it feels like we're alone, it'd be really easy for us to get salty to God or to get salty to the people around us. That's our opportunity to get salty in such a profound, such a special way. See, some of you are in a situation right now where it'd be really, really easy for you to go and get salty. Maybe you're in a situation where maybe your kids are making decisions and choices that you wouldn't want them making. It'd be really easy for you to get salty at them, or for you to get salty at God because they're not living the way that you'd have them live. But can I tell you, rather than getting salty, this is your chance to get salty when you can continue to pray for them and believe the best for them, and to be asking that man, God, that they'll really see God the way that you see Him, that they'll get conviction and a revelation as to who God truly is, that God's best is still in front of them, that they'll realize what they're doing, and that they'll find Jesus the way that you want them to. And you continue to pray, and you continue to have that hope, continue to have that joy, and you continue to love and care for them, even though they're not living the way that you live. And that is how you can be salty when your situation and circumstances saying you should be salty. Maybe you're in a workplace right now, and man, you're finding yourself up against the bump, and everyone's hating on you, and life's just so difficult. It'll be so easy for you to get so salty with your business, to get so salty with your colleagues, to get so salty with that organization. Yet you continue to be kind, you continue to be caring, you continue to take an interest that allows you to be salty in that positive sense. Because oftentimes it's the situations that we go into where everything suggests we should be salty in the negative, that we are empowered, and by doing the right, acting right, keeping that same resolve, keeping that same faith, keeping that same hope, it really does allow us to be salty. See, if you're watching this and you're a Christian, the reality is you're probably still following, you've probably still got a faith because you've met some people who were salty in the most hardest of circumstances. That you saw them going through something in life that was so difficult, that should have knocked the faith away from them. And yet you saw them grow closer to Jesus. You saw their faith increase in that season. And that just reminded you that you too can have faith in your season because you saw the way that they did it. See, that is the power of being salty in those circumstances. We see it with these early apostles, and yet we've got that same calling on us as we go through life. As we move on, what I want to do now is just read a little passage that Peter wrote. This is in his letter called 1 Peter. It's from chapter 3. And as we go through this, what I really want you to understand is that when Peter's writing this, he's not writing this as like an ideological academic who's in a nice, secure, safe room writing this stuff because it sounds nice. No, Peter is the person who's been arrested. Peter's the person who's been flogged. Peter's the person who's experienced the persecution of being a Christian. And this is what Peter would say. He says, finally, all of you should be of one mind. Sympathize with each other. Love each other as brothers and sisters. Be tender-hearted and keep a humble attitude. Don't repay evil for evil, which is often my first inclination, right? Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you. Hang on a minute. When someone insults me, do you know what I'm saying? I want to insult them back. And he says, no, don't do that. He says, instead, pay them back with a blessing. This is what God has called you to do, and He will grant you His blessing. And he continues and he says, now who will want to harm you if you're eager to do good? And I wonder if when Peter's writing this out, like a little brainwave goes off, because he's like, yeah, because that's what we think, right? Who would want to harm us if we just do good? No one would want to harm us. And I wonder if at this point he goes, well, actually, we used to try to do good. And what happened to us when we were doing good? We found ourselves in prison. We found ourselves flogged. He says, but even if you suffer for doing what is right, God will reward you for it. So don't worry or be afraid of their threats. Instead, you must worship Christ as the Lord of your life. And if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it, but do this in a gentle and respectful way. Keep your conscience clear. Then if people speak against you, they will be ashamed when they see what a good life you live because you belong to Christ. Remember, it is better to suffer for doing good if that is what God wants than to suffer for doing wrong. Powerful, powerful words from Peter. So as we bring this to a conclusion, let me just draw out three principles. Three principles that we see firstly in Peter's letter and what he wrote here, but also three principles that we see that were refined and probably reflected from the way through his story as we see it play out in Acts. And the first principle is this, is that we need to love one another. So when the apostles were released from prison, they got together, they prayed together, they were there together. And I wonder if that's what helped them pray the right prayer, to pray for boldness rather than for the persecution to stop. When they were put in prison and brought before the Sanhedrin, they were brought together. After being flogged, they rejoiced together. And this is the power of being together. See, when we really love one another and we're together, something like a bond forms around us and you get strength out of that bond. See, I was a teenage boy once, and anyone who, especially males who have been through teenagers, we tend to do at least something stupid at least once. Some of you a whole lot more, some of us a whole lot more in our teenage years. But one thing that I've observed is you see a teenage male walking along and someone gets cheeky to him. If that teenage male's walking along by himself, he might look at that other person and then he'll be like, I'll just mind my own business. I'm not going to say anything. I'll just keep going. I'll just avoid it. But you put that same teenager with a group of people around him, with some of his friends around him, and someone says the exact same thing that looks exactly the same way as the person that said it the first time they were alone. And this time, that teenager's like, what are you trying to say? You want to try and start something? You want to get something going here? What are you saying? You want to go? Let's do this. Come on. Why? Because they've got people around them, because they're standing together, because they've got their people around them who they know love them. And what that does is it makes them bolder, it makes them more powerful, it makes them do things that they wouldn't do when they're alone, because all of a sudden you've got the strength of the crowd around you. And can I tell you, as someone who's trying to follow Christ, you need the strength of people around you who are also following Christ. That's why he calls us to him. He says we need to love one another, sympathize with one another, let go of all that petty stuff, because when you're in battle, not with each other, but when you battle as actually against, the prince and principalities and stuff that's going on in the world, you're going to need each other, you're going to need to fight together, and you're going to need to be of one accord. We need to love one another. If we're going to be effective, if we're going to stay salty, we really need to love one another. Hey, let's move on, eh? The second thing that we see play out in the book of Acts, and then in this little passage, is that we've got to do good. We see the early apostles healing many people. They're doing good stuff. They're really helping people by healing them. That there were many signs and wonders. It says that they were highly regarded by the people. Remember that they were highly regarded. How do you become highly regarded? You become highly regarded when you help people, when you're willing to serve them, when you're willing to get alongside them. That's how you become highly regarded. No one becomes highly regarded because they're selfish, but they become highly regarded because they're selfless. These guys got that they were doing good. And if we look through that account of what Peter said, we actually see him telling us to do good. He says, hey, don't pay evil for evil. Don't return it. If someone insults you, don't return with an insult. No, go and do good. Go and be a blessing to them. Really hard to do. But he's saying, hey, remember, just do good. And then he says, who will harm you? He says, if you are eager to do good, who will want to harm you if you're eager to do good? This is him telling us to do good. Oh, I've messed this passage up, but if you look up 1 Peter 3:17, there's another passage who talks about us doing good, that we're called to do good. He demonstrated it by the way that they were acting, and then he encourages us, if we're going to stay salty, if we're going to be salty in the environments that we go, we've got to do good. And look, it's easy to do good when it's easy. But what we've got to understand is we've got to expect trouble. So remember, the disciples were told, you will be flogged in the synagogues. And then they were, and then they continue to do good. You and I, we've been warned that in this world, we will face trouble. When that trouble comes and it's hard for us, we need to continue to do good. Don't just think life's going to be sweet, because there's going to be some difficulties. In this world, there will be trouble. When that trouble comes, you and I have got a choice. We can either let that trouble turn us salty, or we can allow that trouble to make us extra salty. I don't know about you, but I want to be in a place where I am salty. And the reason it's so important, the reason it's important that we love one another and we do life together and we've got one accord, is when we're going through situations that can make us salty, when we're going through those situations that can make us salty, what is it that determines whether we're salty or salty? See, when it comes to faith, a lot of people go through very similar circumstances. In fact, we often hear stories of people that are going through the same circumstance, the same situation, makes one of them salty in the negative, and it makes the other one salty in the positive. We get one person who gets a report of bad health, and they've got sort of like a time frame on their life. They've only got a year to live. This is what's going on. And that can make some people very salty and bitter to God, bitter to others, and really make them salty in that negative sense. Here we see other people go through that same situation and they become so salty because they still maintain hope, because their hope's not just tied to something in this world, but it's tied to something in eternity. They have an eternal hope. And we see the people go through the same circumstances. One comes out salty and one comes out salty. We see people in workplaces and one comes out salty and another goes through the same situation and they come out salty. And the reason for that is it's not our circumstances, it's not our situations that make us salty or salty, but it's our perception of those circumstances. And how do we perceive circumstances? Well, we view them through a lens. And one of the biggest things that shapes the lens through which we view those circumstances is the people that we've got around us. When we've got the right people around us, we look through the right lens and we can perceive the circumstances in the right way. And that helps us remain salty rather than salty. It helps us to do good rather than turn to evil. And I tell you, we need the right people around us. So when those circumstances come in our life, and those circumstances are going to come in our life, because Jesus promised us that in this world we will face trouble, that we need the right people around us. We've got the right lens to ensure that we become salty and we can continue to do good. And then the third principle that we see in both the Acts and then in this little passage is that we need to respond gently and we need to respond respectfully. See, as you look through Acts, and I couldn't put up all the times that they appeared before the Sanhedrin and talked about, but one of them it says, when Peter's addressing, he says, rulers and elders of our people. He doesn't get out there and say, oi, I'm smarter than you, I'm better than you, I know Jesus, you don't, you're an idiot, how did you miss it, what's wrong with you? He says, hey, he respectfully, gently talks to them and says, hey, rulers and elders of our people. Inclusive. He brings me, there's a deference here, there's a level of respect in the way that he talks to the Sanhedrin. He's very, very respectful. And this is another little passage in Acts, and this is one of my favorite passages in Acts, because I'd love people to say this about me. It says, the members of the council were amazed when they saw the boldness, because that prayer being answered, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John. For they could see that they were ordinary men with no special training in the scriptures. They looked at them and said, man, these are just ordinary guys like you and me. It says they also recognized them as men who had been with Jesus. Can I tell you, when you spend enough time with Jesus, people start to notice it in you, because that is where our ability to be salty comes from, because we've spent that time with Jesus. If we're going to church, but we're not really spending any time with Jesus, we're not going to be that salty. But people should see when we actually have that personal relationship, that personal walk, that personal connection with God, man, we can be salty. And people should hopefully be able to look at our lives and go, man, there's something about him. There's something about her. He must have been, she must have been with Jesus. And so when Peter's writing his letter to Christians, he says, if someone asks you about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. Always be ready. If someone says, hey, well, how can you have hope in the midst of this adversity? How come you've got a faith in God? Rather than saying, no, or I just do, or anything like that. He says, no, be ready, have an answer. Be able to talk to them about it. Have a reason for your faith. He says, and when you do it, make sure you do it in a gentle and a respectful way. See, a lot of times when people share their faith or talk about their faith, they do it in a condescending sort of a way, where they're looking down on the person they're talking to and implying, man, you're dumb, you're stupid. Or if you're only as smart as me, you'd understand that there really is a God. Or they'd say, well, what's wrong with you? How have you missed this? But that doesn't help anyone. So Peter says, no, you've got to do it in a gentle and a respectful way. One role model in my life is a man called John Maxwell. And in John Maxwell's written a lot of books and was probably the world's foremost expert on leadership. And I was listening to him talk, and he's a strong Christian, and he's got a real heart to see people come to know God. And he says when he's talking with like business executives and stuff, he's got a networking question. He says, a networking question that I often give to business executives is this: when you meet me with someone, ask this question, who do you know that I should know? And he says, every now and then he'll have a dinner and he'll go around the table and he'll go, hey, well, I gave you guys a networking question in our session today. Let's put it to good use. Who do you know that I should know? And they'll go around the table and people will say, well, this is who I know that you should know. And he says, by the time he gets to the last person, and the last person will always look at him and be like, well, who's someone you know that I should know? And he's like, look at that, I just set it up. How easy is it for me to say, I know exactly the person that you need to know is my God. But what he does is really smart. He says, when they ask me, who do I know that I should know? I said, I don't know if I can tell you yet. I go, what do you mean? I go, I don't think you're ready for it. He says, every time I say to someone, hey, you're not ready for it, do you know what the next question is? Why am I not ready for it? So they always go back, why am I not ready for it? Oh, you're just not ready for it. Because do you know what happens when you tell someone you're not ready for it enough? He says, they just really want to know. When you tell someone they can't know something, it generally makes them want to know it even more. And then he tells stories about how someone will say, well, am I ready yet? And people will ring him every couple of months. Hey, John, who is it that I should know? Are you ready to tell me yet? You're still not ready. Sometimes he'll let this drag on for up to a year. But he goes, hey, the right time will always come when they're ready for me to tell them about my God. Another tip that he gives is if he's having dinner around a table with a few people, he has a rule that we're only allowed one conversation, and he'll often introduce a question or a discussion topic. And he says, I like to go around the table and just ask everyone this question. And then the question is, what is something you wish people would ask you? And then he goes around the table and people one at a time say, and this is what I wish someone would ask me. And inevitably it gets back to him and he answers when people say, well, what is it, John? What is it that you wish people would ask you? And John says, I wish people would ask me why I am so in love with God. And again, someone will say, well, John, tell us, why are you so in love with God? And he'll again say, well, you're not ready for me to tell you, or not now. The time isn't right. And then those people will keep coming back and asking the questions. He says, all I want to do is get them hungry. And when they're hungry enough, I'm ready to feed them. I think there's something so smart about this. He is someone who is always prepared, always ready to give an account. And he just is very intentional about how he goes about it, because he doesn't want to just blurt it out, but actually build hunger in people. So when he tells them, they're most receptive to hear it. And he does it in a gentle and a respectful way. Right, team, let's see this early church, these early Christians, they stayed salty. They stayed salty. My prayer for my life, my prayer for your life is that you will stay salty. That we're not going to be salty for a moment, but man, we're going to live a life where we remain salty. What are the principles to help us remain salty? We are going to love one another. We're really going to love one another. We're going to do good. We're going to do real good. And when we get the opportunity, we're always going to be ready and we're going to respond. We're going to respond gently and we're going to respond respectfully. And if we do that, I'll tell you what, we are going to remain salty in the positive. We're going to have a profound impact on the world in which we live. Hey, can I just ask you to do me one thing? I'm going to play for you a song. And as we play the song, I'm going to ask you to pray. I'm going to ask you to pray, God, help me to be salty. Help me to be salty. At the end of the song, I'll come back because I would love to personally pray for you too. So enjoy the song, pray as you listen, and I'll see you back here in a moment.
Oh, all of this for your glory. 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 No longer I who live, now Jesus lives in me. For I was dead in sin, but I woke up to see the light. All of this for your glory. All of this for your glory. All of this for your glory. All of this for your glory.
Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I thank you for every single person watching this. Father, I thank you so much that, man, you give us such an incredible example of what it looks like to stay salty, to make a big difference in the world around us. And so, Lord, I pray for every single person who's watching, who's listening right now, Father. I pray that, man, you will just do such an incredible work in them. I pray that you really will help them to remain salty. I pray that they'll really know you so well. And especially those people that are in situations or circumstances right now where they could easily think that you don't care, or they could easily feel that you've neglected them, or could easily be saying, God did this for me last time and he's not doing it again this time. Where is God? I pray that you'll help them to be able to see those circumstances correctly and know that you are there in the midst of them, that you love them, that you care for them, that you're there with them, that you're still at work. And Father, I pray you help them to be salty in that positive sense when their circumstances and their situations imply or look like it should make them salty in the negative sense. Help us to be salty. Help us to remain salty, to stay salty, so we just keep going. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen.